Edgar Cayce, the clairvoyant. Edgar Cayce spoke frequently of Atlantis. During his life readings, he claimed that many of his subjects were reincarnations of people who had lived there. By tapping into their collective consciousness, the Akashic Records, a term borrowed from Theosophy, Cayce declared that he was able to give detailed descriptions of the lost continent. He also asserted that Atlantis would rise again in the 1960s, sparking much popularity of the myth in that decade, and that there is a Hall of Records beneath the Egyptian Sphinx, which holds the historical texts of Atlantis. Recent times, as continental drift became widely accepted during the 1960s, and the increased understanding of plate tectonics demonstrated the impossibility of a lost continent in the geologically recent past. Most lost continent theories of Atlantis began to wane in popularity. Plato scholar Julia Annis, Regents Professor of Philosophy at the University of Arizona, had this to say on the matter. The continuing industry of discovering Atlantis illustrates the dangers of reading Plato, for he is clearly using what has become a standard device of fiction, stressing the historicity of an event and the discovery of hitherto unknown authorities as an indication that what follows is fiction. The idea is that we should use the story to examine our ideas of government and power. We have missed the point if instead of thinking about these issues, we go off exploring the seabed. The continuing misunderstanding of Plato as historian here enables us to see why his distrust of imaginative writing is sometimes justified. One of the proposed explanations for the historical context of the Atlantis story is that it serves as Plato's warning to his fellow citizens against their striving for naval power. Kenneth Fetter points out that Critias' story in the Timaeus provides a major clue. In the dialogue, Critias says, referring to Socrates' hypothetical society, "And when you were speaking yesterday about your city and citizens, the tale which I have just been repeating to you came into my mind, and I remarked with astonishment how, by some mysterious coincidence, you agreed in almost every particular with the narrative of Solon. 70. Fetter quotes A.E. Taylor, who wrote, "We could not be told much more plainly that the whole narrative of Solon's conversation with the priests and his intention of writing the poem about Atlantis are an invention of Plato's fancy, Cadiz, and Seville provinces, and they speculated that Atlantis had been destroyed by a tsunami." Extrapolating results from a previous study by Spanish researchers published 4 years earlier. Spanish scientists have dismissed Freud's speculations, claiming that he sensationalized their work. The anthropologist Juan Villarreal Robles, who works with the Spanish National Research Council, said, "Richard Freud was a newcomer to our project and appeared to be involved in his own very controversial issue concerning King Solomon's search for ivory and gold in Tartessos, the well-documented settlement in the Doñana area, established in the first millennium BC, and described Freud's claims as fanciful." A similar theory had previously been put forward by a German researcher, Rainer W. Kuhne, that is based only on satellite imagery and places Atlantis in the Marismas de Hinojos, north of the city of Cadiz. Before that, the historian Adolf Schulte had stated in the 1920s that Plato had used Tartessos as the basis for his Atlantis myth. Other locations, several writers, such as Flavio Barbiero as early as 1974, have speculated that Antarctica is the site of Atlantis. Page needed. A number of claims involve the Caribbean, such as an alleged underwater formation off the Guanahacabibbs Peninsula. In Cuba, the adjacent Bahamas or the folkloric Bermuda Triangle have been proposed as well. Areas in the Pacific and Indian Oceans have also been proposed, including Indonesia, i.e. Sunday. Page needed. The stories of a lost continent off the coast of India, named Kumari Kandam, have inspired some to draw parallels to Atlantis. Page needed. In order to give his account of Atlantis verisimilitude, Plato mentions that the story was heard by Solon in Egypt and transmitted orally over several generations through the family of Dropides until it reached Critias, a dialogue speaker in Timaeus and Critias. Solon had supposedly tried to adapt the Atlantis oral tradition into a poem that, if published, was to be greater than the works of Hesiod and Homer. While it was never completed, Solon passed on the story to Dropides. Modern classicists deny the existence of Solon's Atlantis poem and the story as an oral tradition. Instead, Plato is thought to be the sole inventor or fabricator. Hellanicus of Lesbos used the word Atlantis as the title for a poem published before Plato, a fragment of which may be Oxyrhynchus Papyrus, 1959. This work only describes the Atlantides, the daughters of Atlas, and has no relation to Plato's Atlantis account. Despite these doubts, Plato's narrative has had a profound influence on later literature, philosophy, and popular culture. The Atlantis story has inspired centuries of speculation about lost civilizations, utopian societies, and the consequences of hubris. Writers and scholars have often used the tale as a framework to explore human ambition, the pursuit of knowledge, and the moral responsibilities of power. In addition, the myth of Atlantis has been incorporated into countless fictional works, ranging from novels to movies and video games, often portraying the civilization as technologically advanced, spiritually enlightened, or catastrophically destroyed due to moral failings. Its enduring appeal lies not in historical accuracy, but in the symbolic exploration of societal ideals and warnings against overreaching pride. Thus, whether treated as historical conjecture, philosophical allegory, or literary inspiration, Atlantis remains one of the most enduring and versatile myths in Western culture, continuing to captivate the imagination of scholars, writers, and the public alike. In the New Era, the 3rd century AD Neoplatonist Zodicus wrote an epic poem based on Plato's account of Atlantis. Plato's work may already have inspired parodic imitation, however. Only a few decades after the Timaeus and Critias, the historian Theopompus of Chios wrote of a land beyond the ocean known as Meropis. This description was included in Book 8 of his work, which contains a dialogue between Silenus and King Midas. Silenus describes the Meropid men who grow to twice normal size and inhabit 2 cities on the island of Meropis: Eus, Epsivis, Pious Town, and Machimos, Fighting Town. He also reports that an army of 10 million soldiers crossed the ocean to conquer Hyperboreans, but abandoned this proposal when they realized that the Hyperboreans were the luckiest people on Earth. Heinz Günther Nesselrath has argued that these and other details of Silenus' story are an imitation and exaggeration of the Atlantis story, by parody, for the purpose of exposing fantastical ideas to ridicule. The creation of utopian and dystopian fictions was renewed after the Renaissance, most notably in Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, 1627. The description of an ideal society that he located off the western coast of America. Thomas Hayret, 1649-1694, followed him with The New Atlantis, 1687, a satirical poem in 3 parts. His new continent of uncertain location, perhaps even a floating island, either in the sea or the sky, serves as background for his exposure of what he described in a 2nd edition as a true character of popery and Jesuitism. The title of The New Atlantis, by Delarivier Manley, 1709, distinguished from the 2 other works, is an equally dystopian work, but set this time on a fictional Mediterranean island, in which sexual violence and exploitation is made a metaphor for the hypocritical behavior of political figures. In Manley's case, the target of satire was the Whigs, while in David McLean Perry's The Scarlet Empire, 1906, it is socialism as practiced in 4 Atlantes. It was followed in Russia by Velimir Klebnikov's poem, The Fall of Atlantis. Gib Atlantidi, 1912, set in a future rationalist dystopia that has discovered the secret of immortality and is so dedicated to progress that it has lost touch with the past. When the high priest of this ideology is tempted by a slave girl into an act of irrationality, he murders her and precipitates a second flood, above which her severed head floats vengefully among the stars. By Ivan Mistrovich, 154. The work was part of a series inspired by ancient Greek figures, with the symbolical meaning of unjustified suffering. In the case of the Brussels fountain feature, known as The Man of Atlantis, 2003, by the Belgian sculptor Luc van Soom, the 4-meter-tall figure, wearing a diving suit, steps from a plinth into the spray. It looks lighthearted, but the artist's comment makes a serious point. Because habitable land will be scarce, it is no longer improbable that we will return to the water in the long term. As a result, a portion of the population will mutate into fish-like creatures. Global warming and rising water levels are practical problems for the world in general, and here in the Netherlands in particular. Robert Smithson's hypothetical continent map of broken clear glass. Atlantis was first created as a photographic project in Loveladies, New Jersey in 1969, and then recreated as a gallery installation of broken glass. On this, he commented that he liked landscapes that suggest prehistory, and this is borne out by the original conceptual drawing, which includes an inset map of the continent, sited off the coast of Africa and at the straits into the Mediterranean. Beneath the waves, where sunlight dances on forgotten stone, whispers of a sunken kingdom endure. It is a story etched not in history, but in the soul of our imagination. A haunting melody of a paradise lost. The city sinks, a jewel swallowed by the sea. Yet its people rise, carrying the seeds of a new dawn to distant shores. Atlantis sleeps in the deep, a timeless dream of what was and what could be, forever calling to the explorer in us all. Mythology, Antillia, Avalon, Brazil, Mythical Island, Bridia, Cantareguelo, Fortunate Isles, Hiram of the Pillars, Lemuria, Continent, Wise Underwater. Geography, Bimini Road, early Holocene sea level rise. Other, various speculative and cultural references to lost continents and civilizations. A Faroes Islands postage stamp honored Janus Djurhuus's poem, Atlantis. The fact that Atlantis is a lost land has made it a metaphor for something no longer attainable. For the American poet Edith Willis Lynn Forbes, the lost Atlantis stands for the idealization of the past. The present moment can only be treasured once that is realized. Similarly, Ella Wheeler Wilcox finds, for the Irish poet, the location of the lost land, 1910, in one's carefree youthful past. Even Bolin, in Atlantis, a lost sonnet, 2007, defines the idea when the old fable makers searched hard for a word to convey that what is gone forever. For some male poets, too, the idea of Atlantis is constructed from what cannot be obtained. Charles Buechler, in his Newdigate Prize poem, 1910, thinks it grows from dissatisfaction with one's condition. And because life is partly sweet and ever girt about with pain, we take the sweetness and are fain to set it free from grief's alloy in a dream of Atlantis. Similarly, for the Australian Gary Catalano, in a 1982 prose poem, it is a vision that sank under the weight of its own perfection. W.H. Auden, however, suggests that the myth of Atlantis reflects the human struggle to reconcile desire and loss, using the fabled land as both an emblem of unattainable ideals and a mirror for contemporary moral reflection. Out of such frustration, through the metaphor of journeying toward Atlantis in his poem of 1941, the poet advises that while traveling, you will meet with many definitions of the goal in view, only realizing at the end that the way has all the time led inward. A few late 19th century verse narratives complement the genre fiction that was beginning to be written at the same period. Two of them report the disaster that overtook the continent, as related by long-lived survivors. In Frederick Tennyson's Atlantis, 1888, an ancient Greek mariner sails west and discovers an inhabited island, which is all that remains of the former kingdom. He learns of its end and views the shattered remnant of its former glory, from which a few had escaped to set up the Mediterranean civilizations. In the second, Mona, Queen of Lost Atlantis, an idyllic re-embodiment of long-forgotten history. 1925 by James Lowe Dryden, 1840-1925, the story is told in a series of visions. A seer is taken to Mona's burial chamber in the ruins of Atlantis, where she revives and describes the catastrophe. There follows a survey of the lost civilizations of Hyperborea and Lemuria, as well as Atlantis, accompanied by much spiritualist lore. William Walton Hoskins, 1856-1919, admits to the readers of his Atlantis and Other Poems, 1881, that he is only 24. Its melodramatic plot concerns the poisoning of the descendant of God-born kings. The usurping poisoner is poisoned in his turn, following which the continent is swallowed in the waves. Asian gods populate the landscape of the Lost Island, 1889, by Edward Taylor Fletcher, 1816-1897. An angel foresees impending catastrophe and predicts that the people will be allowed to escape if their semi-divine rulers will sacrifice themselves. As a final example, Edward N. Beecher's The Lost Atlantis, or The Great Deluge of All, 1898, serves as a doggerel vehicle for its author's opinions. That that the continent was the location of the Garden of Eden. That Darwin's theory of evolution is correct, as are Donnelly's views. Atlantis became a theme in Russia following the 1890s, taken up in unfinished poems by Valery Brusov and Konstantin Bauman, as well as in a drama by the schoolgirl Larissa Reisner. One other long narrative poem was published in New York by George V. Golokvastov. His 250-page The Fall of Atlantis. 1938 records how a high priest, distressed by the prevailing degeneracy of the ruling classes, seeks to create an androgynous being from royal twins as a means to overcome this polarity. When he is unable to control the forces unleashed by his occult ceremony, the continent is destroyed. Friends, if you enjoyed this fascinating story of Atlantis and lost civilizations, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel right now, because part 3 is coming very soon. And in part 3, we will reveal the next chapter of history. Secrets hidden for centuries, truths lost between philosophy, poetry, and the struggle for power. And a story that proves Atlantis was not just a city, but a warning. Don't forget to turn on the bell icon, so when part 3 goes live, you'll be the first to watch it. Remember, the story is not over yet. The real secret